what? Thank you so much. We have Phil Drysdale from across the pond over here visiting us today. So, Phil, what are your thoughts on marriage and Proverbs 31 woman? I mean, you think that's the way? So now you're married to Tilly, and so now you're demanding that she becomes a Proverbs 31 woman. What does that mean to you, and what does that mean to her?
Man, my wife is the bread earner in my house.
Excellent.
That's up, right?
So you've trained her well right off the gate.
Right off the gate, I opened up. I was like, look, Proverbs 31 wife, this woman clearly has multiple jobs. So get out there, man.
Get out there.
I want to see at least 3 jobs, 3 incomes.
And so now, she's working hard for you. I mean, what is kind of we look at Proverbs 31 and we think, the mother, she's doing everything with the kids, and then she, does that from 8 to 9 and gets the kids off to school.
Yeah.
And then she goes to her job, drives across town, does her job, eats lunch. While she's eating lunch, she's putting out PTA meeting notes and stuff like that. She's doing coaching, she's planning out. Then she goes back to work, makes more money. Then she goes, picks up the kids, gets everything organized, swings by the grocery store to get food to cook it so that she can do everything. While she's cooking for her husband to come home, she's doing the homework with the kids, science projects, all that. And then, puts the kids to bed and she's ready for her husband.
Yep.
That's Proverbs 31 in a nutshell. Modern day.
Yeah. Well, and this is the thing, right? So we do this with all of the scripture. And it's not a condemnation. It's just a way we approach something. Is when we read something, we read it through our lens, through our bias, right? And so I open the Bible and I read about marriage, and I immediately think, well, marriage is like X, and I'm thinking of today. So I'm thinking boy meets girl, someone sets them up on a date, or they meet at the youth club or something like that, or they go on some website, a Christian Connection or something like that. That's a little ad for Christian Connection. But you go on something, you meet the girl, and then you get together for a coffee, and maybe I like her, maybe I don't. Let's have another date, and then you get together. I definitely like this girl. This is cool, and you start hanging out, and and there's this increased levels of intimacy and connection, and before long you get engaged, and everyone's celebrating, and then you have a wedding. And it's great, and then you finally get to have sex if you're a Christian. Realistically, if you're a Christian, a lot of them have had sex anyway. So. but I just feel really bad about it now, and sex is ruined for them. Right. But that's kind of the modern concept of marriage, and yet we fail to see that that's actually a really, really modern concept of marriage. That's not what anyone in our Bible has ever done. Like if we open the Bible from Genesis right through to like Revelation, the last passages that were written, maybe probably Timothy and some of these, no one in that time period went on a date. Not one person. And we know this as a fact because dates weren't a thing until probably about 200 to 300 years ago.
They weren't picking up girls on their carriage, taking them to Starbucks?
Now, that may have happened, right. But it was usually married men looking for something on the side, right? And this is honest, and this is even in Judaism. This was a very common practice. And so what actually happened in the whole world, we're not even talking about just Mesopotamia, the kind of region that the Jews were in. This is the whole world. We can track how marriage and relationships have evolved. Marriage was a business transaction. Marriage was, I will buy that child from you, and as a pledge to my son, and it will ensure different elements. So it might be that our families are knit together. It might be to ensure that we have certain control over certain lands. It might be a whole host of things. There was so much behind relationships and connection, but it was mostly driven by power. And this was even in the poor. So we think of this, we think of like you watch an old movie or something and you can watch how the kings and queens from different lands are arranging their kids to get married. And, they're like, I don't want to, and tough, you have to, because Denmark needs to be good allies to Belgium, or, and we know that, right? But we don't think about that as actually that's how it all worked. And so even, you go and you be a potato farmer, right? And you have a daughter, and the turnip farmer next door, he's like, hey, look, we live next door to each other. Imagine if our kids had a super turnip potato farm, right? And joking aside, that's kind of how it worked. It was you would be thinking, well, who's next to me, or who has resources I need, or who would be a good ally, and this works from the very poor right through to the rich. And so for the poor, it might elevate your status a bit. which is really important. It might elevate how much money you have coming in. There was so many different dynamics, but this was all how it worked. You would sell your daughter to a family, or maybe a man who had been widowed or had been divorced and was looking for a new wife. He might buy one for himself, but there was a transaction here. And then you wait until this young child has her first period. Okay, now you're ready to be a woman, and welcome to being married. And so that doesn't sound like marriage. So if I said marriage, you're not thinking of this, right?
Right.
Right.
So I'm not thinking about a 13-year-old.
No, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have daughters, right?
Right, yeah.
So when I'm saying like, oh, are you looking forward to your daughters getting married? You're not thinking like, oh, I hope someone shows up and offers to buy them today.
Right.
And then when they turn like 12, 13, like they just disappear and that's it.
Right.
Like that's not, but I'll have a better business empire. You know, my business will be allied with this business, and maybe I could sell them to a flooring guy, like, you know, or a walls guy.
Right.
I don't know. We'll get the whole structure at some point. You know, that's not what we're thinking. And so I think it's just really important when we open something like Proverbs 31 and we're reading, oh, who can find a wife like this? We're entering into a whole different element. This isn't I'm going on dates trying to think like, ooh, is she going to be a good mom, or is she a savvy business person, or is she going to be a loyal woman that's going to stay at home and have the kitchen and the bedroom ready, or any of these kind of modern kind of Christian notions of what a woman should be. That's not what we're necessarily bringing to the table. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
Well, when is kind of the culture changed? You know, because like I was even just watching, all right, plug here, Father Brown. And Father Brown said in kind of this after World War I, World War II time frame. And they're even talking about what you just said, aligning families together, you know, predestined to be married, these kids and stuff like that. So relatively thinking, that's only like 80 years, you know, ago, 100 years ago, still being kind of a strong thing. I mean, if they're writing that content in these shows, obviously it was a real thing just 20 or 80 years ago. Yeah.
So it depends. So it's been on its way out for a long time. And for most of us, right, this day and age, if you're in like America or Western Northern Europe, like we're so far removed from it that we're kind of like, wait, what?
Right.
But actually, yeah, it isn't that long ago that even in our cultures, this still kind of would have happened, probably mostly within the upper stratospheres of society, the rich, the powerful. And maybe it still happens a little bit today as well. If we look at it, there's just probably a little bit more choice involved and a little bit more of a voice from the children. But there's probably still an element of like, well, you can't marry them. They're not a celebrity, or they're not rich, or, you know, their parents don't own like some sort of huge business empire or whatever. But generally speaking, people that are more normal, you know, in the real world, aren't operating like that. But really, it happened around the time of the Enlightenment. And so in the Enlightenment, and we had this like renaissance of freedom, of thinking for yourself, of screw the state, screw the church, screw the whatever that tells us how to think.
Telling your parents.
And so this is happening on a big macro level of like, well, shut up, Pope, or I don't care what my pastor says, or I don't care. I want to find out what's right, what's wrong. I want to seek truth. I want to think for myself. And I want a bit of my own identity. And so there was a concept that kind of was born in the Renaissance of like, what if we married for love, right? So before we married for a whole bunch of things, but love wasn't the equation, which is a fascinating thought. This is a really modern idea, to marry someone for love. Now, what's really interesting, right? We're Christians, so we come from a Christian tradition. Our Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition is really unique in history, because throughout history, everyone was marrying for these different reasons, and love wasn't a part of it. But in the Jewish Christian world, the narrative was, yes, you're married off to someone, your parents choose who you marry or whatever, but you love that person that you marry. And that's such a beautiful thing. In some ways, it's almost more beautiful, you know, that you're just lumped with someone and you go, all right, I have to learn to love this person, right? It's hard enough to love the person that we pick sometimes, right? You know, once you get to know them and you're like, oh my gosh, you're driving me insane, or whatever it is. Like, so the concept of you're just lumped with this person that your parents picked, and you're going to fall in love. You're going to choose to pursue this person, to see the best in them, to be other-serving and choose not to go the selfish path, but the selfless path. That's a beautiful thing. So the church has always had this beautiful concept of falling in love with the person that you've been paired with. But it is a very modern idea that actually we should love the person and then choose to pair up with them. That's very post-Enlightenment. And really, it took about 100 years before we even really started to apply it. It was really, really hard fought. And one of the biggest fighters against this was the church, right? And so the church's argument historically was, well, if you change from trying to love the person you're paired with and you change to just falling in love and then you just marry whoever you whimsically love, well, when you stop loving them, you'll just get divorced. And it's quite fascinating in some ways. That was a very prophetic voice. They are right. That does happen a lot. But on some level, I still think this is a positive progression, a positive move in the right direction, that we're choosing. We fall in love with someone, that we have that freedom, that liberty, that choice, which I think is a very Christian principle, that freedom. But it is very modern, a lot of this stuff.
Well, I was going to say, because we see that in the story of Leah and Rachel, he was basically forced to marry. And that's interesting because if you're forced to be married, then it's like you're forced to stay together. Mm-hmm. But, if you go into it with the option of, I choose my love for this person, what happens? And then they get a divorce. So that's an interesting thought. I think we can kind of see his, we want to choose love instead of being forced for love in that story. I mean, it brings a whole new enlightenment to me when reading it now. But, I think it's funny because we even see shows where they're being married at first sight.
Yes.
There's kind of this new concept. And I've talked to my wife and I've said, listen, I think anybody could be married. And she's like, no. And I said, no, I really do. I feel like anybody could be married to somebody else. I don't feel like there's that perfect one out there, that soulmate or stuff like that. She's real romantic, so she's always like, no, there's got to be a story. Haven't you ever seen, Rapunzel or Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella? There's got to be the perfect story, But... And I think it's the effort. There is a true effort behind the love in marriage.
Yep.
But where we talk about Proverbs 31, it doesn't seem like a choice of love. It seems like a demand of love. Proverbs 31, if you're going to enter into this relationship, you act like XYZ. You have these 3 businesses. You have these kids. And it was a, point to where women didn't raise the kids and mother them, but they had wet nurses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So they had more time even. And then also, if you read it, she talks about her servants and stuff like that. So,
this is a pretty wealthy woman, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, I got to get like when my wife brought up about having a cleaning lady, I was like, well, who's going to pay for that? Yeah. And then here this woman, she has all kinds of things going on. So, she married a guy who presented the ability for her to have all of these things. Yep. I think that's the thing too, is as men, are we putting the demand on our wife to basically like a startup business of Proverbs 31, or are we providing her all of the resources to be
freedom to
that, right? And then is it even her choice to do it or not to do it? But I just think that when we put a demand on our wife to be a Proverbs 31 woman, we need to look at it a little better,
Yep.
And it's an interesting thing that you said that church hindered people from wanting to fall in love on their own.
Yeah.
Because of that control. And I question why does it benefit the church that way or not? But then again, I ask the question, why does the church preach that you're the head of your household and God's going to punish you if your woman doesn't get in line, if your kids don't stay in line, if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, it's your fault. You're a bad person. God's going to punish you.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that there's so many things I could have gone there. There's a few different directions. But one of the things that I would say is we are wired as humans not for what is true and not even what's best for us. That's not how our brains have developed. Our brains have developed.
You gotta break that down.
So if you think about how we've lived over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, the people that have survived and the people that have then had children are people that are wired for safety. Okay, you're wired to do wild and crazy things. You probably get eaten by a crocodile or something. It's like so. Generally speaking, this is kind of like basic evolutionary theory. I know that's a hot topic to bring up, but I'm not saying that you have to be fully bought into evolution or anything like that. But we can just see people that are wired to be wild and crazy, a lot less likely to survive, right? And so that's just a simple principle.
They made a movie about it, Crudes.
There you go, right? So these people that are wired for safety survive, and as a whole, we've proven through so many studies that the brain does not make a choice based on what's right or wrong or what's true or false. It makes choices based on what will keep me safe or what is dangerous. And so if we're constantly making choices on what makes me safe, that means our choices as a whole are generally not necessarily in a post-enlightenment, we seek the truth world. They're not really wired to do that, right? And so we think we're wired and we're so, I just seek the truth and I'm open and I question everything and what I believe is true because I sought it out. But the truth is a lot of times that's not the case. What we sought out was maybe true and then we just discarded it to make us stay safe. And I think this is the story of the church. This is the story of us as individuals. So I'm not meaning to beat up on the church because church is just a collection of individuals, right? And even as an institution, it's certain individuals in charge and they're all wired for safety. So when you have a system that's threatening something that you know or believe, you're going to push against it because it doesn't feel safe. I don't feel safe. I don't know how to do things. Even if this isn't a good system, I know how it works and I know how to function it. I know how to lead this. I know how to
Well, and that's what I wonder too, just based on that. Like, did then people create the content of saying, we don't believe in divorce in church? Because now if you go there, you believe you'll be married forever because the church doesn't believe in divorce. And so seemingly, oh, great, if I connect with the church and I'll never get a divorce, I'll never go through those emotions or stuff like that. Me personally, I feel like the church has created more divorces because they've put too many laws and restrictions on people. People will pick up their own laws and restrictions. I was listening to a radio station in the morning and this caller called in and she was like, what should I do? And she says, my live-in boyfriend, gave me a list of stuff he wants me to do. And he wants me to have dinner on the table ready when he gets there. And he wants me to do this and he wants me to do that. And she starts talking about this list. And she's like, what should I do? We're not married. And I'm thinking, well, technically you are because you guys are living together. Right. Yeah. But yeah, like, and that's the thing is I realized as a man, I did those things. Like I had lists, I had expectations. And so it might be, if my wife is doing my expectation list, then do I feel safe? And then the other thing is if the man is doing the woman's expectation list, does she feel safe? Provided for, stuff like that. I've even talked to people about business and houses and, he says a woman's safety is that house. So he's like, don't mess with her house. Don't put a second loan on it for a business deal or something. Like keep the house safe, risk the business, you know? And I thought, man, that's just an aspect that if you don't take the time to think and consider the woman and her safety in your marriage and relationship, what would it be like if I risked the house? So there's been things for me that I've had to consider her safety, but then I say, how many of these judgments am I considering my own safety, not hers?
Yeah. And how much are we bringing again our concept of what it is to be in a healthy relationship, what it is to be a female, what it is to be a male? All these things come to play. And I know I'm the crazy liberal European or whatever, but we fail to see that what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman changes over time as well. And so again, we read what it is today and we put it into the past. And so if I was to describe to you a small child wearing a frilly hat and a big frilly dress and it's all pink, what gender am I describing?
Little girl.
Right. No, not at all. Right. So before the 60s, 50s, all children dressed unisex, and they would wear dresses, and they would wear big pink and blue and all sorts of other colors as well, because pink and blue weren't gendered, right? They weren't given a specific sex to be attributed to. And then in the early, I think it was about the 70s or so, we started to, probably it was about the 60s, we started to have more gendered clothes. So we decided what pink was for girls and blue was for boys. And then actually in the 70s and through into the early 80s, we then got rid of that again and we went back to unisex. And so you'll see kids like in that era were dressed exactly the same and things like that. And then in the 80s, we've gone right back to, okay, boys wear this, girls wear that. And so the boys would wear like a little suit and everything, right? That kind of era. And so, but the point is it changes, right? If you look at kings in the 1800s, they were wearing like, there's a picture of a king I can't remember, I think it's King Louis VII, and he's wearing like hot pants, tights, high heels. He's got the big wig on with his curls. And that was masculine. That was a male thing to do.
Right.
You were the most manly man if you were in your hot pants and tights, right? And we laugh like crazy at that, right? Or then we go back to the Bible days, right? And we go, well, women have to wear skirts in church and men have to wear trousers. And I'm like, well, the men were wearing the big long dresses, right? They were wearing robes. They didn't have trousers or, pants, you guys call them. Too British here. But the point being, things change a lot of the time. And we have to look honestly at how have things changed in our world for men and women. And I think if we're honest, we now live in a culture that is not single earning possible for the vast majority of our populace. Women have to work. If you're married and you want to live and pay that mortgage, the woman's going to have to work for a vast majority of people.
Right, because things are getting more and more expensive,
Absolutely.
And I know as a man, my wife does not work, and as soon as money gets tight, I'm like, woman, you need to get a job.
Yeah. I'm already working too much. But so the point being that, like, not just that, though, but women should have the freedom to work a job. If they want to go get educated, if they want to go have a job, that's wonderful, that's exciting. The thing for me, the Proverbs 31, is it's not a demand at all. It says, who can find this woman? Who can find a woman that's passionate about these things? Who can find a woman that wants to go do these things? Not who can make a woman passionate about these things. Who can make a woman do these things? And that's, again, our culture, our concept. So even touching on the single earner concept, the concept of a man provides and a woman just stays at home, looks after the kids, her jobs are in the kitchen and the bedroom, and that's like a really hard conservative position. I know that's a lot of people don't hold that. I know I'm in the South right now, so maybe a lot more people around me do.
Right.
But that's a common position. But actually, what's really interesting is that's a very modern idea. So that came about the late 40s. And actually, it was only ever really practiced for about 15 years as a practice that has worked for the vast majority in the West. For the vast majority in the West, they haven't been able to do that since about the 60s.
Well, it's
Women
interesting because,
again.
like when you read in the Bible, you do read about so much of servants. Mm-hmm. And so then to think
things have changed.
Right. So,
and that's the scary dynamic. And to me, right, we can say there's pros and cons to all sorts of different dynamics. But the scary part to me is we have turned the woman in our home into a servant. Right. And that, to me, is a scary, scary time. So we've taken away slavery. We've got rid of servants, and we maybe can't afford to pay a wet nurse and a whatever, a maid and a cleaner and whatever. So now we've made the woman all those things.
Right.
And
I was just going there because, for me, I've thought about that. I mean, and really it's because the man did not step up on his part, so as things get tighter, right? So if my business were to get tighter, my secretary's cut, and I'm going to be doing the secretarial stuff, or, the pressure gets more and more put on me. But in marriage, basically when things start getting cut because we're not making enough money, the pressure goes more and more on the woman. Yeah. And that's not fair.
Yeah. And I think we need to recognize the history of the male-female connection as well. So a little bit history lesson again, right? So we go far enough back, and men and women were hunter-gatherers, right? So you look at the first 11 chapters of Genesis, it's very pro-nomadic tribe. It's very anti-culture. It's very anti-farms. It's very anti-civilization. It's very pro, we just walk around with our sheep and our cattle, and, we live off the land. And that's because that's really how most of, all of humanity started. Right. Early humans lived off the land, and they were roamers. They were nomadic. And over time, they started to settle in locations. They figured out, if we just plant this stuff in this location, if we just pen in a bunch of cows, if we just pen in a bunch of chickens, we can start to kind of just settle and have a bit of some roots. But what happened at that point is women and men worked just as hard when we were nomadic. You would both be capable of gathering some berries. Maybe a woman would strap a baby to her with a sling or something, but you could both gather babies. They would both traverse as much as 25 miles a day, both the men and the woman. It was constant go, and it was constant work, and everyone chipped in, and everyone was equal. Maybe there was some divide in hunting for meat. So once we started hunting for meat, but on the whole, women would have done that as well, unless they were currently nursing or pregnant. Okay. Now that shifts when we start moving into agricultural society. So we start having to plow fields and stuff. Now we plow fields. Women can do that as well. just as well as men. So they are heavily involved and just as involved. So again, very equal in the society as far as who did what. But when we shifted to going, oh, we can plow with, that's not quite right. So women could do that fairly well, but as soon as they were trying to get pregnant, as soon as they were nursing children, very hard to plow fields, very hard to do a lot of that manual labor work. And so what naturally happened was men shifted to do the heavy duty manual labor work, and women shifted to do the lighter work that was more, in today's terms, it would be like, the laundry, the looking after the kids, the schooling, or whatever that was, it was more those terms. Okay. So you've got this kind of, suddenly there's a divide and they're going in a different direction. Now, what's interesting is at a certain point, we suddenly go, we could get some cows to plow this field, right? So now all of a sudden, what took like 20 men to do over a few weeks to plow all these fields or something, they can now just have a couple of men with a couple of cows. And now there's 18 men standing around with their thumbs twiddling them, going, what do we do, right? And so suddenly we didn't then go, oh, maybe we should chip in and take on some of these responsibilities that the women are doing. Maybe we could help out more, or maybe we should just like start mass producing food. There was no real need to do that at that point. And so what they did was men were suddenly freed up, and they were freed up to be creative, to explore, to learn, to relax and have fun. And so naturally men became smarter. They became more educated. They had time to come up with ideas and inventions. They had time to lord it over their women. And suddenly there was this huge power dynamic that comes in with the advent of using tools and not having to use our physical bodies as much. And so there's this big shift that happens, and that hasn't changed. And it's got actually worse and worse as we've become more and more efficient in doing that, right? So these days we can do even more. We can have robots running our factories, right? So factories typically full of men, right? Well, now they're full of robots, right? So there's even more men kind of like take us, what do we do now? And so there's this divide there. But what's interesting is in this day and age, there's no reason for that divide necessarily. Right? Women are capable of going to an office and working just as well. They are capable of doing most of anything that we do in this day and age, because very few of us, maybe there's some things that they wouldn't be capable of doing while they're pregnant. Right, while they're trying to get pregnant, maybe while they've got a sling wrapped around them, it's best that they're not on a construction site, with big steel beams wandering backwards and forwards, the little baby with a hard hat on it. So of course there's some of these divides that are very physiological between men and women, but on the whole, we've proven again and again and again when it comes to intellect, when it comes to capacity to be creative and things like that, men and women are practically equal. And so I think that we're in a day and age where we do need to question how we've historically operated. Is it time to explore new opportunities? Is it okay for the woman to be the provider? My brother, he's the stay-at-home dad. He was a chef, and he hated being a chef. And he would work from like 10 a.m. to about 11 p.m. every day. Right? And he'd have a couple of breaks in the middle of the day. And if he kept doing that when he had a kid, he would never see his kid again. And so his wife, who worked in the oil industry and made decent money, she was like, well, I'll keep doing this and you stay at home. You stay at home with the kids. Totally normal. It's totally normal in Europe. I know it's probably a bit more of a buck of a trend.
I got a friend and I got a family member who are both stay-at-home dads.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And it doesn't need to have any stigma, but I think it still does.
Right.
I don't know if you've had conversations with them about that, but I imagine some people, there's a stigma there. My brother has a stigma there. He goes to the toddler group and it's all women and they treat him differently. Right. And the men in his life, his friends, sometimes treat him differently because, you say you don't have a job? Oh, you're not the provider? There's so many connotations in that.
Well, for me, I like being around my kids. Like if I let my wife go out all the time and I take the kids, or I'll take the kids with me or stuff like that. Like I love being around the kids, as much as possible. But, and what we're not saying today is that a woman has to work, should work, or not should work. I mean, basically we're just putting facts out on the table, to think about, and analyze our thoughts. Are they good thoughts? Are they helping my marriage? Are they hurting my marriage? Are they helping my wife be valuable? So that's kind of what we're just trying to do today.
Yeah. I think for me, it's about removing all the shoulds, right? In this day and age, there is very few shoulds in marriage, really, apart from love one another. But really, again, you don't need a should there, right? When you get married to your spouse, right? When you're making your vows, you don't have to be like, I promise not to be with other women, right? Because you're in love with this person,
Right.
you're passionate about this person, and so the onus there is, again, it's about opportunity and possibility and exciting. And it's like the Proverbs 31 woman. I don't really mind if my wife wants to run businesses, or if she wants to stay at home with the kids, or what she wants to do. I want her to do what she loves, she's passionate about. Because we all know, those of us that are in relationships, that when our spouse, when our partner is happy and comes alive and feels fulfilled, that makes for a great marriage connection. That is amazing.
Right.
And that's what I want for me. I don't have any shoulds. I probably have a few shoulds, but I try to constantly go, oh, I have an expectation on my wife. I need to let go of that. That's unfair. And of course, this healthy dialogue, this healthy conversation. Hey, I would love it if you didn't leave your socks on the floor, or whatever. But again, you're an adult here.
Right.
I have no control over you. That's not what being. Even the passages we talk about being heads of households and things like that. Like, that's not what this is about. We're using this to abuse and hold people down more often than we're using it to lift people up, which is what it's all about, really.
Right. Well, and that's kind of the thing is it's not only valuable for my wife, but now is it not valuable for my daughters?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what information am I teach them? Should I go in and be like, all right, listen, you need to learn how to cook because you're going to have dinner ready for your husband. You need to learn how to clean because you need to be cleaning the house all day. Don't worry about a job, or you need to go to school so you can make a good job so that you're, and, for me, I kind of on this thought of helpmate. And does your boyfriend, husband, is he not worthy of help? Is he just working at, the fast food restaurant? Does he have no agenda? Like, how are we focusing on together? Are we helping each other? Are we helping each other, produce more? It's not you're a wife so that you can maintain the man's house and that's your help, because otherwise just get somebody to hire. Like, I mean, it doesn't even make sense to me, kind of this concept of, you're my helpmeet to the maintenance of the house. But a lot of people degrade their wives to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, we're all functional adults, I can pick up my laundry just as much as my wife can. Right. I can cook. I do all the cooking in my house.
Right, me too.
So, I like to cook more than my wife, so I'll cook, but it's sitting down and having a conversation and go, what do you like doing? What do you not? We both hate doing this. Well, should we alternate it?
Right.
But we both bring something to the table.
We get the kids to do it.
Yeah.
You hate doing dishes? I hate doing dishes. Hey, kids.
Dishwasher. Yeah. No, but I think this is how you have to have honest conversation, and especially about history. I think we romanticize history. We read our current situation, our current views into history. And when we actually look at history and we go, what's the context of this happening? Why is it happening? Why is there a system in place where men do this and women do that? Oh, it's because women can't ride horses. They'll have miscarriages. So, of course, all the men are riding horses or whatever it is, right? But guess what? Women can drive a car, no problem. Right? So things that we couldn't do before, men go and get something. Women stay in the place. Well, now women can go get something, right? So whatever, it's simple things, like little things we look at culturally, historically. When we take away the historical context, when we take away a cultural context, we make really, really poor decisions. Wow. That's something we can prove again and again in history, right? When we don't look at why we're making these decisions, and instead we just go, we've always done this, let's keep doing it. That's a bad place to make decisions from, in my opinion.
In my opinion, too. I mean, and it's interesting, because really I've never analyzed kind of past history is the focus of my present day marriage, I mean, and that's an interesting thought to bring in, where did this concept come from? Why was the concept, introduced? And, I thought it was interesting where you were talking about the men's having more time on their hands. And so they were able to think and create and do and challenge and try. And have we done that as husbands where we give the woman the mundane stuff to do and fill in her head just with repetitive cooking or cleaning and watching the kids and stuff like that. And we're not challenging her, you know. Where could her mind go? Where could her, you know, thoughts take her? Where could her dreams take her? You know, and I said that about my wife. I don't want to be 60 years old and be like, oh man, I remember when we did this. Oh, this was so great. That was so great. And sitting on the rocking chair watching the sunset, and she'd be, I wish I would have done.
Yeah.
And you know, that'd be the most embarrassing thing as me as a husband, to have all of these achievements and then her to feel empty.
Yeah. And I think that we don't have a culture for women speaking up about that particularly well. You know, there is a very much, well, this is your place, and this is how it's always been, and this is how it is. So I just came from Louisiana. I was in Louisiana before I came over here, and we had just some of the most phenomenal conversation. But when I got there, I noticed, oh, I'm only hanging out with guys. That's so weird for me as a European. Most of my friends, I would say about 70% of my friends are female, and that's really normal. And to me, I would lose so much of the variety and diversity in my life if I didn't have very close female friends. If my only female friend was my wife, are you kidding me? That would be so weird. But that is the case for a lot of people over there. They don't have many friends of the opposite sex. And there is a context of like, nope, that's what we've always done and that's the way it is. And you can't trust a partner to be with someone of the opposite sex and all these different things, right? Probably more prohibition causes like all sorts of issues. But it was fascinating to me talking to a lot of the girls, and they couldn't believe the conversations I was willing to have with them. And they couldn't believe that there was a guy willing to sit down and talk about stuff and ask them their opinion and ask them to have conversation. We had a big group of about 25 people doing Q&A, and they were asking me questions. And it was all guys asking questions. And I was like, guys, shut up. I was like, how many women are in here? There's like half the people in this room are women, and they're not asking questions. And you know what? They asked better questions.
They do.
They asked better questions, but they didn't feel safe. Like one of the girls comes up to me, she's like, thank you so much for letting me talk. And I was like, this isn't like, you know, someone that's like 70 years old that's been brought up in this, these are people like mid-20s. And she's saying, thank you for letting me talk.
Wow.
And I'm like astonished. Now, there was so many different things that I can look at, especially being European and coming into probably the most conservative areas of America as well. So I know it'd be different in New York City or San Francisco or something. But you know, so of course there was a lot of odd divides, and there was things with race, and there was things with all sorts of stuff that I looked at and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. But just on that level of how are these wives free to be? Now, their husbands were amazing and treating their wives amazingly. They really were. And this isn't to dig on them, because actually these were really great connections. But it shows that there's still this undercurrent. You know, that we talk about implicit and explicit issues. So for something like racism or sexism, there's explicit racism and sexism, right? So explicit racism is I say inappropriate words or phrases. I treat someone very badly, and I know that I'm doing that. There's no question that I know it. Now, there's implicit issues where maybe I have no idea how this benefits me more than the other person, right? So how many husbands have no idea they're part of an implicit system that puts them on a pedestal and puts women down, and they don't know, right? They're on the rocking horse at 65 going, life was amazing, and their wife's sitting there going, that was awful. I hope reincarnation's right, so I get another go as a guy, right, or something, you know, because that was rough.
Right.
And so that's kind of an implicit systemic issue. So it's a system that says, woman, know your place. Woman, you speak, you know, at home but not in public, or, you know, woman, you know, you stay at home with the kids. The husband gets to have all the fun, and you and I know as well, it's not all fun. I'm not saying men are having the best time ever, because the truth is there's dynamics here, right? If we look through history again, a lot of the men were dying doing these manual labor jobs, right? So and that's a very real dynamic as well. I'm not trying to say, you know, I'm not beating up on anyone. What I'm saying is most of our issues in these concepts are not explicit; they're implicit. They're underlying systemic things. But the onus is on us that once we see it, it becomes explicit. So you're not racist if you're part of a system that can be racist. But as soon as you see the system and how it benefits you and how it hurts someone of a different color, now you're a racist if you keep doing it. Right. And same thing with this, with the same thing with these kind of sexist, patriarchal, misogynistic kind of concepts. If I have a system and I don't know any better and my wife suffers for it, that I'm not being a sexist. or I shouldn't be judged for being I shouldn't feel guilty or shame. And so anyone listening to this is going, oh, I feel attacked right now. I'm not trying to make you feel shameful or guilty, but what I'm hoping is that they might listen and go, am I part of a system that is a bit imbalanced here? Am I benefiting in ways that I would like my wife to benefit from? And once you've thought that and come to the conclusion, yes, to not change, that is sexism. That is misogynistic. That is an issue.
Well, to be vulnerable, I know exactly what you're saying because, I had a lot of friends named Chris, and I would be like, oh, Black Chris, and it's like, well, why call him Black Chris? Why not call him, Chris, the guy who works, it's and so instantaneously I'm sitting there saying, ugh, what's that about? I know I'm not racist or anything, but here I am saying black, why? And also like with wife, I would see it no problem to spend $5,000 or $10,000 to go somewhere, do something, and then I realized she would be like, can I go out with my friends? And I'd be like, well, yeah, here's $50 or $100. And I thought, man, there was such a strangeness to how much I spend and how much she spends. And then I would start to hear her and she would talk about Disney. And so then now she goes to Disney. She probably spends more money than me now. And it's cool though. Like I'm all about it, like I'm like, hey, great. Because I know when I spent that money, I felt good about myself. And I was thinking if she spends that money and feels good about the time she's spending and what she's doing and stuff like that, what a win-win, you know?
She's coming home happy.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, she loves her life. Trust me.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
But there was a real change. And I remember when we first got married, it was like, it's my money, it's my business, it's this, it's that. And she's like, it's our money, it's our house, it's ours. And I was like, well, it's ours of the decision I make, the amount to give you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry. I mean, that's where I was at. It's like, it's ours, and I'll decide what to give you and what not to give you. Yeah. And it took years. Mm-hmm. Just being honest. And it was weird because I bought her first 2 cars, I lavished on her. I bought her clothes. I did all kinds of things when we're dating. And then as soon as we got married, it was like, ooh, my money.
Yeah.
And that was just, I don't know. I mean,
and I was like that with my first marriage. I'm very aware of that dynamic because I was the sole earner. And I didn't earn much. Not much has changed. But I didn't have much money. And my wife was studying, and she was doing all sorts of bits and pieces. But in my head, this was a little bit in my head. This was my money I've earned. I've worked hard for this. But the truth is, I'm not acknowledging. Well, my wife is working her butt off, studying and doing other stuff. And that's not bringing in money, but it's bettering our lives, and it's setting us up for maybe her to make more money than me in the future or whatever. So it isn't my money, and I give you, my little bit of pocket money for you. I'm always treating my wife like a child or whatever, and then I'm even judging how she spends it, right? So my wife goes and buys a coffee, and I'm like, well, we got a coffee maker at home. Like, do you have to spend money on a coffee? And I'm like, what is going on here? I didn't like what that was doing to me, but it actually took my wife to be brave enough to say something at the time, say, dude, this is I feel like a kept woman, like a child almost. And I was like, oh wow, I didn't even see that dynamic. But you're right, that's entirely not healthy. For us, it wasn't healthy at all. And so I think that it's okay to be parts of these systems. That's the nature of growing up in a society that hands you the way it works, right? In the church that says this is how it works. But once you start questioning it and you maybe come to different conclusions, we need to change, whatever that is. It's
interesting because we talk about systems. I see right now you talk about the world being mostly capitalist. And then, there's this conversation about socialists and why. What is the benefit for socialism? Control. All right. Well, same with church. Church should be everybody, everywhere, church all day, every day, wherever you're at. What do? We bring it into and you use this word pinned, right? You said, let's pin in the animals. Mm-hmm. Let's grow everything right here next to our house. Same with church. Let's pin it in and make everybody come here for their spiritualness. Yeah. Let's pin in socialism. Let's pin in everybody to come work at this job. Let's pin everybody to come to work at this university or learn this and basically I see that all these systems that are being created are pinning people in. My question is, are we pinning in our women with marriage? We're like, oh, you stay here, you do this. And it even shows the proof of if we're not, and my wife says this all the time, she says, if you were to pay me, I would be one of your most expensive employees for everything that I do. Mm-hmm. And it's I am getting that for free. Yep. I mean, I'm just being honest and vulnerable here. Is it that we're pinning in our women? Are we pinning in our kids? We're doing it financially, mentally, are we denying our women the lives that God's called them to have?
Yeah. Well, let me say this as well. So this is the thing that I think is quite important in this discussion. These are two people sitting opposite each other that are men, right? So there is
That's not about that
there is
4 or
only
5 times.
penises at the table,
Right.
right? And we are talking all about women.
Right. And Ricky.
And so it's a prime example again. We're hosting a conversation about what do women want, how should they be treated, whatever. And it's two men sitting here discussing how these women should be. And so, I know that wasn't intended. We didn't have a plan to talk about this or anything. But I think as well, so that highlights the point I want to bring up is that we need to ask women, hey, do you feel penned in? How do you feel? What's going on? Like, what do you want? What are your desires? What are your hopes? What are your dreams? And we'll find out that we probably are, and we'll find out in some other ways, no, they're okay in some other ways, and we're being paranoid in some way or shape or form. But I think if we're going to be honest, and if the women in our lives, whether it's our wives, our daughters, our friends, if they feel freedom to be honest, we're gonna take a few sucker punches. It's gonna hurt. It's gonna really hurt, because I do think 100% we're penning in women, and it. So one of the things that I'm constantly amazed, I get to travel and be all over the world, and it's a real privilege doing what I do. But what it does expose you to is that different cultures live different ways, right? So I'm talking about historically how the different cultures shape, but even just looking across the world at this time, you have women in very different positions. And what's really interesting is we can live in such a bubble that we forget that the way we do things is a very cultural thing. We think it's the way it's always been done, or we think it's the right way for our religion. But there's Christians in Europe that live very differently to Christians in the UK, that live very differently to Christians in Africa, right? The culture has a very strong dictation on what a woman is and how she gets to live, and what a man is and how he gets to live. And so I think one of the things we need to do is we need to ask women, what is going on? Where are you at? What does this look like? But I think as well, we need to recognize that those women live as in some ways a slave to the system, right? In the same way that if you were to ask an actual slave back in the day, what do you want? Well, you imagine the dynamic of a master who's been whipping and beating his slaves suddenly comes to a realization, maybe I'm not doing very well. I'll ask them, what do you want? And he comes down to his slave that he's beaten up, he's treated like crap for decades, and he goes, oh, I'm wondering, what do you want? Do you think he's going to go, hey, I'd quite like some freedom, I'd really like an apology, no, right? Because they're part of a system that has not allowed them to say this. And so this is something I experience, is that when I travel and I speak about, I go through Bible verses and talk about women's rights and how they're entitled to just as many rights as men, and they're allowed to speak, they're allowed to lead. The head of the household is not a position to be lorded over anyone or to make decisions for anyone or that kind of thing. One of the things I've found is in conservative, more traditional parts of the world, women are more vocal than men in speaking out against what I'm saying.
In conservative
parts of the world,
right?
Because they're a part of the system and it feels threatening. It feels scary. They don't know what that freedom's like. They don't, right? It's again, we're wired for safety. We're wired for status quo. And it's scary to them, the thought that they might be able to have freedom, right? You take someone out of jail and you give them freedom and it's terrifying. They've become institutionalized. And in some ways we've institutionalized women in this culture that we live in. And so one of the things I look for is I look to more progressive societies. Now, we might look at some of the elements of progressive societies as positive or negative, but I think in many ways there will always be some positives and some negatives. So we have to just be open to that and go, okay, well, I'm a big boy, I'm a big girl. I can make my decisions on what is positive and negative, but at least look at it to see, have they progressed in positive ways, in ways that I'm not able to go yet. So we look to somewhere like Western Europe, Northern Europe, places that are very progressive. And you go, hey, let's ask women there how they're enjoying their freedoms. Let's ask women there what they see when they see our wives, our daughters. Let's ask women there, what would they recommend? Let's ask women there, what do they think the Bible says about that? And we'll be amazed when you encounter someone that has more freedom, how they talk about their past and the past that they've come out of. It's a very different conversation to someone that's still trapped in it. if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that America is guilty of this probably more than most places, because if I'm brought up in Germany, right, within about 5 hours, I can be in about 23 different countries, right? Not quite, but I mean, there's countries all around me. I've got Holland, I've got Belgium, I've got Poland, I've got France, I've got Switzerland, I've got Austria. They're all right around me. I can get to them all real quick. So if I'm living in a German world and the German way that they believe something about the Bible, or they believe something about marriage, or they believe something about politics, that only works so much. Because you're very quickly faced with how what people around you believe, and you're very quickly faced with how some of it is better. It just is. Sometimes people think better. And this is the problem with America, is that they're not faced with many other options. They've been faced with Mexico and Canada, but they're not faced with, they don't know the day ins and day outs, right? They don't know that if you were to transplant them over into certain countries, they'd have a much better lifestyle. On metrics of quality of life, America isn't number one by any means. It's quite low, actually, unfortunately. And so, if they were to go and live in Norway, a place that's evil and terrible and socialist, and it pays too high taxes, they would have a freaking ball, because they would be wealthy. They would have an incredible quality of life. They'd have pretty much everything provided for them. That they are working. They're it's a capitalist country, Norway. We call it socialist, but there's no socialist countries in this world particularly, and there's no capitalist countries in this world. America's not a capitalist country either. It's a capitalist socialist country. Right. Plenty of socialism, especially for the rich. And so America tends to enjoy socialism for the rich and capitalism for the poor. And that's what we all do in all our countries, to be fair. But so we look at places that are slightly more socialist or slightly more capitalist, and we kind of label them in a dualistic black or white fashion. But it's rarely that, And so we can then look at other countries and go, how are you doing this? How does that? And it just takes us outside this bubble, of like, well, this is the way it is. It's not that way necessarily, right? It's not that way that you have to treat women that way. It doesn't have to. And in some ways, you're going to look at other countries and go, whoa, thank you, Jesus. Right. And other ways, you're going to go, oh, Lord, help us. Lord, forgive us. I think that's a real thing that I've said once I've started traveling and exploring different cultures. I've gone, oh, Jesus, I'm so sorry that I have conflated my culture with my faith. And that's a really dangerous thing to do, that we all do on some level or another. And so I think especially in this concept of how we treat women, how we treat our kids, how we raise our kids, we run the risk of not moving forward with the rest of the world. And I think America runs the risk even more so because it isn't as globalized. It isn't as connected to its neighbors because it doesn't have many neighbors. And so I think that's a real reality. It's something that I'm aware of with kids, right? So when I was in Louisiana, talking to people that are in their like 20s, 30s and up, I'm like, oh, okay, this is how you think. I then talk to teenagers. How do you think? Oh, wow. Because these kids are not raised in an American culture. Yeah, there's the American culture, but I'm stuck on my phone and I'm living through Netflix, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. No kids are on Facebook. That's just for us old guys. But they're living in a global world. And so they are exposed to, wow, woman, you have a voice. Our kids aren't going to accept that they're like, to be subservient to a guy. They're not going to accept that they have to marry a guy and just live at home and look after kids and do the laundry. That's not going to happen. Even in somewhere that is more landlocked, so to speak, like it's just a bit more, or not landlocked, the opposite, ocean-locked in a way. And so I think there's all these sort of dynamics that are in play, but we do need to look at other cultures and how they apply Christianity, because it causes us to question how we apply Christianity. It's
an interesting thing because there's a delight for me that 65, 85 million people have left the church in the last 2-3 years. And the reason is because doctrine has not been infected into these people, or they're taking a step back. It's kind of like you were talking about, you did a liquid diet for 2 years and then you started introducing slowly things back into your system. Yep. I think about that the same world for Americans. If they step back from the doctrine of the church and they're not getting, bombarded with all of these church ideas, and then they start getting these things back introduced into their about life and equality and each other and marriage and love, what would our world look like? We look at the church as being the authority on everything that's right and wrong, black and white, And I said this the other day. I said, man, when it comes to my kids, having sex or different things like that. I want to take God out of the scenario. Like, are you being displeasing to God? And I had to change that thought a little bit, that I don't want to take God out of the scenario. I want to take the religious belief of the church out of the scenario. So I'm going to leave you with a cliffhanger there, and we got Phil Drysdale with us. Go ahead and put a shout out to your site and stuff like that, so people could follow if they want to dive in a little bit deeper on your grace message.
Yeah. So I've got a website called The Grace Course. It's a video website. Everything there is free, but there's videos on all sorts of topics: hell, afterlife, grace, faith, love, law, lots of different random topics. There's one on there's topics on homosexuality, on human psychological development, lots of very broad kind of spectrum of teaching there. And I've got a podcast where I interview lots of people. Or if you want to connect with me, I'm always happy to chat. Find me on Instagram, Phil Drysdale, just PhilDrysdale. I'm on Facebook if you're an old person as well. Phil Drysdale Ministries, you can find me on that as well. But yeah, I love connecting with people. I love chatting with people. So like, message me if I said something that made you think and you're like, what are you talking about? Message me. I'd love to hash it out. I'd love to talk about it. So yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time.